So today I'm going to talk about an artist I'm not particularly fond of, Jim Lee, and whom I have no qualm calling the Michael Bay of the modern comic book industry. And it's not because he isn't a good artist, because I actually quite admire his work. I wish I could draw superhero bodies and muscles as well as he does. And I wish I could draw captivating backgrounds with so many details as well as he does. And I admire how he's managed to become the base style of the entire comic book industry, emulated by other artists such as Andy Kubert and Robert Liefeld. But there is something lacking in his work, and it's that his characters aren't really very alive, and they're not particularly interesting. They don't evoke a lot of emotion, which can work. It works very well if you're doing something like the old style Batman and Robin stories, which I very much like, where you're not really, because with a writer like Frank Miller, you're not really exploring characters and character stories as much as you're exploring ideas, and that's where Jim Lee's art really excels. But for example, if we look at this website here, the outhouses, and particularly at this particular discussion about whether Jim Lee has ever drawn a considered great comic, and we come across some valid points. For example, this lack of diversity, all his characters, they all look the same. It's definitely not correct that he lacks anatomical knowledge, because he does. It's incredible. But it's true, he hasn't really evolved. His faces are all the same. He can't draw expressions other than grimace. That is true. For example, if we look at these first few images from Google search of Superman, you see all very similar expressions. There's not a lot of variety. He's not exploring the full spectrum of human emotion. And if we take another artist like Frank Quitely and look at his first few images on Google search, you see a much greater spectrum of emotion, because Frank Quitely is much more drawing a human being, whereas Jim Lee doesn't. He has one stock character model which he repeats for all of his characters, just like he does in this poster image of the new Justice League here. And so we're going to take this image, and we're actually going to see how we can stop it looking so stale. I'm going to redraw it. I'm going to try and emulate his style, but it's not really my natural style, so it'll turn out a little bit more cartoonish. And really the essence is to just make your characters look individual. So in the original, they all had the exact same pose, all sort of three-quarters with the hands basically around the sides. Here I've changed Superman. He's facing the front. He's at the forefront. He's the main man. So I've given him a front-facing position. Fists on his hips. Slightly narrow stance, because he isn't actually that confident. He's Superman. He's sort of a little bit nicer than the others. And then Batman to his left. Give him a different pose. If you want your characters to not look stale, you can always have them interacting with something. So, for example, here, Batman, I put him interacting with his cape. He's holding it back, so it's not just swaying away, it's still covering him, unlike Superman, who's just letting his kind of fly freely. And whereas Superman has a very confident, face full forward, Batman, I've given his slightly leaning forward. So it's slightly looking down on other people, he's a bit more pessimistic. So already we've differentiated them in character much more than Jim Lee did in his poster. And we're going to continue with that trend. I mentioned that Superman, I give him quite a narrow pose with his legs. Wonder Woman, I've given a very wide pose, because at least in the Justice League comics that Jim Lee was illustrating, and with this poster, Wonder Woman is introduced as an extremely confident character, to the point where she doesn't really understand how actual normal humans interact very well. And I've reflected that. She's also quite aggressive in the comics, so I've got her holding her lasso. She's got something a little bit more kind of, not aggressive, but more playfully aggressive than Jim Lee's original poster. So again, you always take any opportunity you can to reveal a bit about their characters. Next to her is Green Lantern. Green Lantern was my least favourite character in the New Justice League run. I hated the whole run, but it was made especially worse by Green Lantern, who just came off as a bit of a cocky arsehole. Nothing relatable there, to be honest. But we've given him a posture to reflect that personality. So he's got, his asymmetric poses generally tend to be a little bit more cocky than symmetrical ones. So I've got him leaning on one leg. He's got kind of a flamingo pose, hand on one hip. I'm not drawing him very well there, could be better, so I think I'm going to retouch that a bit. Generic sort of just fist with the ring. Yeah, here I'm rubbing it out because I hated how it turned out. Again, all of these, they're not going to be amazing because I'm not Jim Lee. I'm not as good as him. He, you know, well, I think, I personally don't really like, again, what I'm saying, how he doesn't have a lot of variety, but he draws amazing figures, which I can't do. So here I'm retouching it again. Notice already how these first 4 characters, they are all quite unique in how I've drawn them. To further make Green Lantern a bit more cockier, I put his chin kind of pointing up, actually. So not like Superman, where it's just pointing forward. I've got it pointing up, you know. Hair swaying a bit. Always add a little bit of motion into your drawings to make them alive. Capes flying, hair moving, that kind of thing. Flash, here, in Jim Lee's poster, Flash looked extremely serious. Very bored. With like a pounding fist. This is not in Flash's character at all. So I've given Flash a much more playful pose. One where he is kind of lunging forward, almost ready to sprint off, as he would do. I think, personally, much more faithful to the Flash's character, rather than just being exactly the same as everyone else. In fact, I kind of weird, if you look at the original Jim Lee poster, the only one who's actually smiling appears to be Batman, which is not really what you would expect. You'd expect at least the Flash to be smiling, which is what I've done in my own drawing. And yeah, and then your typical kind of scout pose. Much more dynamic. Then, next Green Lantern, we've got Aquaman. He's another, I've given him also another front-facing pose. I think it suits his character. He seems to have a bit of a regal personality. He's very professional, so, and again, he's very confident. So I've given him front-facing, arms crossed, because he's a bit more stern than the other ones, but not like Batman. And yeah, you can use that because, again, the original Jim Lee poster, they were all standing in a 3/4 pose. Definitely want to add a bit, you know, you want to make it vary a bit more. Have some of them front facing, have some of them off to the side. You could even have one of them facing with their back, but I decided not to do that. If you're going to have somebody do something like that, it would probably be Batman, but, you know, not very interesting. The point of the poster also was to show off each character's design, so I've tried to do that as much as possible, even though I hated the costumes, all those lines and everything. Way too complicated. And finally Cyborg, who I've also given a front-facing because I think it suited him as the least organic, shall we say, of the bunch. He would have the most robotic posture, so front-facing with a kind of very stocky arms. Not a lot of charm, maybe. That sort of comes later on, also because in these issues he's almost newly Cyborg. He hasn't really gotten fully used to it yet. He's not the Booyah we know from Teen Titans, so I've given him an equally robotic posture to measure. And again, I think it sort of adds to his character, doesn't it? And so finally, behind the scenes, I've finished it up, added some of the muscle shadings and things to just make it stand out a little bit more. Not really important to show that. And you see already, if you compare it with the original poster, that it already seems a little bit more alive. The characters jumping out of the page a little bit more, and I think it's something you should definitely try and emulate when you're drawing your own comics, if you are into that sort of thing. And what can we hope to see from Jim Lee to stop this from happening? Well, I personally think what Jim Lee needs to do now is either one of two things. Either he needs to explore facial expressions a little bit more, and explore more evoking emotions from the drawn characters, or he could go further in his own route and try and pioneer a style which is more classical in nature. So he could study more classical paintings and images such as this, and do it in his own style. And I think it would really make it splash out a little more. So I've done that. I recreated this drawing quickly in a little sketch in Jim Lee sort of style. And I think you'll notice. I think you'll agree that if he tries this sort of thing, he could actually become much more influential, much more respected in the artistic community. Because I actually think he's got the potential, at the position he's got, with so much power, to actually explore much more new ground. And finally to, as we were talking about before, to actually make some comics that are considered great. He could really fan out, he could really become amazing. But he just needs to explore other areas more, kind of try and evolve a bit. Thank you for watching. See you next time.